Dr. Muja was born in Italy, grew up in Ecuador, and went to a bilingual school. Dr. Muja came here to go to Harvard and then to Yale Medical School. He practiced medicine in Winchester and Medford for 40 years and was on the faculty of Tufts Medical School. He has mostly lived in Massachusetts except for 5 years in New Mexico, working with the Navajo Indians and at the medical school in Albuquerque. His son took over his office in Winchester when he retired, and he's here to tell you about Mark Twain. Please welcome Dr. Mark Muja.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to have an opportunity to speak about Mark Twain, the American Voltaire, the spirit of America. His whole life was spent thinking about America and talking about America, and he really took great pride in the country. I think the best way to deal with him is to go through his life, mentioning his books as we go along a little bit, and you'll get a little bit of an idea of the kind of man he was. His father was a merchant lawyer who had all sorts of brilliant ideas about what he should do. And one of his ideas was that the small town on the Mississippi River in Missouri was going to become a boom town. And he purchased some land there and built a house, and that's where Samuel Langhorne Clemens was born. As he said himself, he increased the population of the town by 1%. It was a town of 100 people. Unfortunately, the town did not do well, and when he was just a little baby, they moved up to Hannibal, which is really the town that is associated with him, and the town that has become famous because of the adventures of Mark Twain. The Adventure of Tom Sawyer, sorry. And this is really the kind of life that Sam Clemens led, is the kind of life described in the book. We was poor, but we didn't know it. They had no money at all, and little Sammy had to work his whole life, doing whatever he could. He was an errand boy. He helped people clean, helped people paint fences, probably you've heard of that, and went through many of the adventures described in Tom Sawyer. He worked at a bookstore, but people kept interrupting his reading, so he finally quit. And he delivered newspapers, but people didn't like the fact that he made up stories to sell more newspapers. And he found the sentence that worked best was war, war. There was no war, it didn't matter.
Thank you.
They were close enough to the Mississippi River that a lot of his life was on the river. And there was a little island close to Hannibal, and they did swim there very often as little kids, even though their parents told them not to. And it is true, as mentioned in the Adventure of Tom Sawyer, they ran into a runaway slave once. They did not turn him in. And also they found a dead man on the island once. Did not say anything about it. They used to hold sessions on the island and talk with all their friends. And I must add, because this is a very important point, some of his friends were black, which was, this is 1835 is when he was born. So 1840 or so, he had black friends. This was going to shape his life quite a bit. The son of the town drunk was one of his best friends, who was later immortalized as Huckleberry Finn. Shortly after a while, the family needed more money, and Sam went to work for his older brother, Orion, who ran a newspaper in Hannibal. And his skills first came through here. His job was to learn typesetting, which he did. But he wrote a few articles himself, and they came out in the newspaper anonymously. This is at the age of 14. Pretty soon, though, he got tired of Hannibal, and as soon as he had a few dollars in his pocket, he went off to St. Louis. So remember this is the end of his schooling. He went to school through age 14, and that's the end of it. In St. Louis, he wandered around town and explored the town and got a job as a typesetter and spent a little time there alone. As soon as he had $20 to put in his pocket, he decided to head for the big city. Off he went to New York. Got a train fare, went to New York City, spent some time there. And the most interesting thing is how he really liked this idea of being totally anonymous. Nobody knew him, nobody knew the family, nobody knew where he came from. Nobody knew anyone else in this big city. He liked that. He spent there a little bit of time, then went to Philadelphia and did the same thing there. Spent a year in Philadelphia working as a typesetter. This was a very important job in those days for the newspaper. Not many people knew how to do it, and he was good at it. So wherever he went, he always had a job. However, he got tired of this life all alone and headed back to St. Louis, where he started hanging around the river. He had gotten the idea that he wanted to go to Brazil. He was not one to hang around home. And even though he was only 16 years old, at this point he was 18. And hanging around the river, he got to meet some of the captains of the ships. And one of them offered him the opportunity to, in exchange for a little bit of work, he would take him down to New Orleans. Once he did that, he gave up on the idea of going to Brazil and decided he enjoyed life on the river. And he took lessons and he really learned to read the river. This was the most important thing. There were no special signs available then, and you had to read the river. Where there was a rock, the water level changed all the time, and he realized this was quite an art. And he admired the captains of these steamboats because, as he put it, they were their own masters. They ran things for themselves. Nobody told them what to do or what not to do. And he spent the rest of his time going up and down the river. Pretty soon got his own steamboat, which he was taking down, and he was making as much as $250 a month, which was quite a bit of money at that time, and especially for a boy who'd grown up with nothing. The one tragedy that occurred here is he had given the job to his younger brother, Michael, to go down with him on the ship. And when they got to New Orleans, there was another ship that needed a crew member. And so he loaned him his brother to go on this other ship upriver. By the time he got back to Memphis, he heard the news that a boiler had exploded. And he got to the hospital in Memphis just long enough to see his brother dying of multiple burns. And this really crushed him because he felt very guilty. He's the one that found the job for his brother. He's the one that talked him into it. And yet, what can you do? He probably would have continued doing this, who knows, for the rest of his life, except the Civil War came up. And 1861, all traffic on the river was stopped. All the boats were eliminated. He joined a Confederate unit and marched with them for a while and actually did a little shooting here and there until he realized, this is not for me, I'm getting out of here. And his brother Orion told him that he had the job of secretary to the governor of the Nevada territories, and suggested to Samuel that he could go to the Nevada territories with him. At this point, I should also say that all his, if you read Twain's book on life on the Mississippi, he describes all his stories about the ship and how to go and how they measure depth and so on. And it's an interesting book to read. But anyhow, after that, when the war started, they headed out for the Nevada territories. The Pikes Peak Stagecoach Company for $150 would take you from Hannibal all the way to Carson City. Grueling job, a grueling trip on the stagecoaches. Fellow passengers smelled badly, the food was bad, the roads were awful, bumpity all the way down. This is all described in his book, Roughing It, and it's kind of interesting that way. He makes the point, the only thing that kept him going through those awful days was the thought of those ham and eggs for breakfast. He looked forward to it all day long and really enjoyed it the day it happened. Just as they were getting there, they got to the Nevada desert, and in those days, you did 20 miles a day, and horses couldn't go much more than that. Day after day after day there, he sort of sat down and wondered, why is this desert so big? And then he realized, it's obviously to keep the Mormons out. They didn't want them to take over Nevada. Well, finally they got to Carson City, and I should read what he wrote there. Let me get near the microphone. This city lies in the midst of a desert of the purest, most unadulterated sand, in which infernal soil nothing but sagebrush ventures to grow. The country is fabulously rich in gold, silver, copper, lead, and thieves, murderers, desperados, lawyers, Christians and Indians, gamblers, coyotes, poets, and preachers. And his one feature that comes through now, he had a remarkable memory, could remember everything he saw, but with a lot of imagination and a lot of working around it. And he was able to write very well that way. What he soon discovered that being secretary to the secretary of the governor of the Nevada territories was a job without duties and without a salary. So he had to think of something, and most of the people there were heading for the hills to look for gold and silver. Of course, he didn't know what that meant, so he headed up there also thinking that he was just going to pick up the silver and the gold and come back to town with it. As he says, though, all I did was I got a sore back and a bunch of sand. And plus, they would always give him certificates of ownership, of part ownership in a mine, but he found out that these certificates don't give him credit at the grocery store. So that didn't really help. So he had no source of income. But there are newspapers there. There was one newspaper in Carson City, and he went to work for the newspaper, writing articles. There wasn't an awful lot to say, so he had to make up stories. He met a guy once who was leaving a town with his family to go to California and never come back. So he made up a wonderful story about this guy and how they were attacked and how the axle on the stagecoach had broken and so on. Nobody was going to check up on him, and it was an interesting story. But anyhow, he got bored of Carson City and went to Virginia City, which was a slightly bigger town with better mines, and it had 2 newspapers. So again, he went to work for the newspapers, but pretty soon the newspapers were fighting each other, so he decided to finally head for San Francisco, the big city. Can you imagine, he's only 20 years old. He's already been in New York and San Francisco in the 1800s. Very, very few Americans had done that. Now, San Francisco was a real boom city. 40,000 people avoiding the Civil War, in addition to all the gold miners and fortune seekers and everything else. And San Francisco had several newspapers, and there were many places he could write articles for. He wrote an impressive article on, and it gives one an idea, a beginning of an idea of the kinds of things that were going to turn him on later, on how badly the police treated the Chinese people in San Francisco. I think we all know that from other stories. They were very poorly treated, but he was the first one to point this out. Because of his articles and how cleverly they were written, one of the San Francisco newspapers gave him the opportunity that they would pay his way to Hawaii as long as he sent him an article every week, and describing what he saw and what went on, and he jumped at the opportunity. And even on the way over, before he got there, he had done a lot of research on Hawaii and had sent articles back explaining what the islands, the Sandwich Islands as they were called, what they were like. And he had lined up in advance an interview with King Kamehameha, who was the king of those islands. And he went, as soon as he got there, started traveling through the islands, and he was appalled. Immediately he turned on the first people that really upset him were the missionaries in Hawaii. He couldn't believe this was an island where everybody was happy, everybody was having a great time and enjoying this wonderful weather. And these people have to come here to tell them there's heaven and hell, and if you do this, you're going to have this problem and that problem. And he was totally against the missionaries and was very upset about that. He had the opportunity of, there was a ship came in carrying 12 survivors of a shipwreck. These were people who had spent 22 days on a raft, and they were finally rescued. So he was the first one there to interview them and sent this article back to San Francisco, which they enjoyed reading about, and these men had a lot to say about the experience of that. One of the letters that I wanted to read was, at one point, I observed a bevy of nude young ladies bathing in the sea. I immediately became worried about their clothes, so I went and sat on them to make sure nobody would steal them. All of these stories led to a little success, but what really changed his life was he was telling his buddies in San Francisco about Hawaii, and his friends said, look, you really are fun to listen to. Why don't we hire a hall, put up a few signs, put an article in the newspaper, and you tell people about this and charge $1 per person. He wasn't too sure he wanted to do that, but they convinced him and made $450 the first night, charging only $1 per person. And this is really what he spent the rest of his life doing. He was really able to talk. He had discovered the value of a pause. He would come on stage and look around, not saying anything, and eventually he had the whole audience in his hands. I don't know if any of you ever had the opportunity of hearing or seeing Hal Holbrook, who played a Mark Twain look-alike, and he had this total knack of talking just like he did. So this sort of changed his life a little bit. He became better known in the newspapers, and he started getting reviews out of San Francisco as well as there. And by now he had been to New York, he had been to Hawaii, he was living in San Francisco, and he got another opportunity at this point. The Quaker City was probably the first luxury cruise ship. And Henry Ward Beecher, probably the most famous preacher in New York City, who would attract 3,000-4,000 people to every one of his services, had organized a tour to the Holy Land and had invited all sorts of people to go with him through Europe, through the Middle East, and down to the Holy Land. And the name of Henry Ward Beecher attracted many people. General Sherman had signed up to be on this boat, and there were another 150 people signed up. It was going to be a 6-month trip, so it was going to take a long time. And one of the New York newspapers, together with one of the San Francisco newspapers, offered Mark Twain the opportunity of going on this boat, and he would have to send a letter every week, just like he had done in Hawaii, explaining about all the places that he had seen, and telling him all about the trip in the boat. And he agreed to go on it. It was not as exciting a trip as he had thought. Most of the people on it, as you can imagine, their pilgrimage to the Holy Land, there was no dancing, no singing aloud, no entertainment, no booze on the ship. And some people even wanted the ship's captain to stop the ship on the Sabbath. They didn't, but they wanted him to do that. Anyhow, off they went, and he was writing letters. When he got to Tangier, like a little boy, he absolutely loved being there. He dressed up like a Muslim with a big thing and put up a little beard on himself, and loved walking around the Muslim sectors of Tangier and seeing what life was like there. But then he went through the rest of Europe like a typical American. He loved America, and all the places he saw weren't as nice as the American places. Lake Como, it's okay, but Lake Tahoe is really beautiful. Mount Vesuvius, oh, that's a nice mountain. I'm glad I saw it so I don't have to see it again. But Kilauea, that was really a volcano. And he went to Paris. Nice city, but I couldn't find a barber. How can you have a city without a barber? And he didn't like that. And then, of course, another one of his pet peeves was when he went to Notre Dame de Paris. He saw pieces of the true cross and St. John's ashes everywhere, bones of every saint you can think of. And again, these things sort of upset him a little bit. They got to Athens, and there was a cholera quarantine, so they couldn't get off the boat. He wasn't going to let him say no, so he waved to some fishermen, waved him a little money, got on the boat, went spent 2 days in Athens in the middle of a cholera epidemic, and had a good time while he was there. Then they went through into the Black Sea, and he actually met the Tsar. At those times, meeting an American was so rare that the Tsar wanted to meet an American, and a group of them went that far. Down they went, and a group of them decided they would go by land instead of going on the ship. So they went to Damascus and all the way down to Jerusalem. And the comments he makes are mostly how poor all the people are. Beggars everywhere. There's no food for anybody, or no clothes. And then there's this great big church of all churches where the Muslims have to go from 9 to 11, and the Christians from 1 to 3, and the Jews and so on. Because if you let two of them come together, they'll do nothing but kill each other. And this sort of appalled him, but this is the way things were. Anyhow, the one thing that is worth mentioning, on the ship there was a middle-aged lady from Cleveland, a Mrs. Fairbanks, who took a liking to him and saw that he was very smart, very clever, always said interesting things, but he knew nothing about manners and society and dealing with women. And she just took him under her wing and tried teaching him. When you get to a door, you let a lady go through first. You hold a chair. When you sit down, this is how you eat. The fork you pick up this way. He had never had any experience like that. No one had ever taught him. He had lived on his own his whole life and had done everything all by himself. And this helped him greatly in the near future, as I will get to. Another passenger on the ship was this young man from Elmira, New York, Charles Langdon. And one day when Langdon was looking at his things, Sam Clemens saw a picture of a young woman, and he immediately said, "Oh boy, she is beautiful. I want to marry someone like that." And so Charles said, "Well, you're going to meet her because she's my sister, and she will be greeting me in New York when we arrive." And there she was, and Sam really fell for her, absolutely liked her. So much so that he went with her. The Langdon family he was one of the wealthiest men in Elmira, New York. He owned a big coal company and had a lot of land in New York and Elmira and a beautiful home. And they had rented an apartment in New York City for a couple of weeks to meet Charles on his way back. As soon as they arrived, he followed them all the way to this apartment and obviously overstayed his welcome. He was still there at midnight when they kicked him out, and they didn't quite know how to deal with it. But the next morning at 8 o'clock, he was there again, and they didn't know what to do with him. He just said, "Now wait a minute. Charles Dickens is speaking today in New York. I didn't want Livy," her name was Olivia Langdon, "I didn't want her to miss it. This is a rare opportunity." So his first date with her was to go listen to Charles Dickens. She was a very quiet, very serious, very sweet, very frail young woman. Totally the opposite of this man who was always running around, jumping around, getting into everything, and who had a temper. He could really, but they got along quite well. And he made many trips to Elmira after that. He proposed marriage, which she refused. And she sort of told him at that point, "I like you, and I like being with you. Let's just be brother and sister." So he started writing letters to her saying, "Dear sister," and always signing, "Your loving brother." This went on until he proposed a second time. She still refused him. But finally she yielded and accepted. February 2nd, 1870, they got married in Elmira. He was 35 years old. She was 25. They had a special train to take just them and the wedding party to Buffalo because they were going to have their honeymoon on Niagara Lake. Obviously, everybody did. When they got to Buffalo, there was a sled waiting for them. This was February. And the sled took him to this big house that was all lit up, had 4 servants at the door waiting for him. And the table was all ready with a meal there for them and a couple of people. And he was really, as he called it, Little Sammy in La La Land. And he had this wife, and she was going to sleep with him in the same bed and wake up in the same room. He couldn't believe it, but he told Libby, I can't afford this. We can't do this. We better get out of here. And she had to tell him that Mr. Langdon had paid for the whole house completely. It was their house, no mortgage. Had paid these 4 servants for a year. Had purchased a newspaper in Buffalo for him to run. That's quite a marriage for a little boy like that. So, unfortunately, he never liked Buffalo. He didn't like it at all. We'll get to that. But they had a very nice beginning of their married life. She had a son, and their first tragedy was this son died. And then she got typhoid fever and got very sick. And then after another year or two, Mr. Langdon developed stomach cancer and died. And they were very sad and upset about this, but Sam couldn't wait to get out of Buffalo. And as soon as his father-in-law died, he sold his Buffalo home, sold the Buffalo newspaper, and went to Hartford. I did not know before, but apparently Hartford at that time was the wealthiest per capita city in the country. And not only that, it was the city where many of the most intellectual people in the country were living. And he bought a plot of land right next door to Harriet Beecher Stowe's house. And he also got some of the architects in town to build him the dream house. I don't know if any of you have been there. The house is still there in Hartford, and it is very worth seeing. And part of it was designed by him, part by Livy, part by these architects. And they were to live there for 20 years. It had a big sunroom where they could look out on their beautiful lawn. It had a big dining room where they would feed 12, 15 people every day. The second floor was all bedrooms, and the third floor was all Sam Clemens. By now, he had become well known. His books had sold very well. Tom Sawyer, Roughing It, Life on the Mississippi, and he was fairly wealthy. Plus the inheritance helped a little bit. One of those Mark Twain pauses, I forgot to say that before leaving California, he had written a little story, The Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. I think it's a pretty silly little story, nothing special, and I don't know that it makes a big difference, but it was the first time he used the name Mark Twain. So after that, he became Mark Twain, and this was reviewed very well by New York newspapers and by California newspapers. So it's a story that really made him famous and helped him sell these other books. He would spend his whole days writing all the time and giving lectures. Shortly after they got to Hartford, he went to London to give a series of lectures. I don't think there were many people in the world then that had been in London and in Hawaii by the time they're in their 30s. I mean, this was a man who really traveled and got around and went to all of these places. He also, at about this time, he published, at that time, Atlantic Monthly was the magazine to get an article in for a writer. And he published his first story in Atlantic Monthly, Ain't Had No Troubles. And this was the story of, they had a person working in the kitchen in Hartford who was black. And she was always cheerful, always singing, always going around looking happy as can be. And one day he happened to ask her, Rachel, you ain't had no troubles? And so she started to tell him her troubles. how her husband was sold, how her kids were sold, her kids died. Well, what's the sense of crying? And so on. She told him a story. And he wrote it all up, and Atlantic Monthly accepted it. And it's probably one of the most read stories of Mark Twain. And from this point on, I guess I'll call him Mark instead of Sam, because he really became Mark Twain. They had 3 kids and 3 girls, and he was a marvelous father. He really used to enjoy spending time with the kids and would write them letters, would invite all sorts of other children to be with them, and he would sit in with them. There'd be 10 teenage girls, and he would be right there with them, sometimes listening to them, sometimes entertaining them with stories. And the big thing every year was Christmas. He would dress up as Santa Claus and always had some plot of some sort, and letters he would write to the kids ahead of time under his name or other names. He really enjoyed all that. But he also had a temper, and sometimes he would get very angry and very upset and scream and holler. And he had a cussing room upstairs where he could go cuss. And he had a billiard room where he entertained all his friends and where they did have a few drinks. But his kids, his daughters really loved him and liked him, but they were also scared of him. And this became apparent because his youngest daughter, Susie, wrote a biography of her father that actually sold a few copies and sold fairly well, and she was a very impressive girl that way. He started Huck Finn right after they moved to Hartford, but all the other books he was able to just write and finish, and off they went. Huck Finn was very difficult. It took him 10 years to write it. He kept changing chapters. He kept changing the wording. And one of the biggest problems, I was a little surprised to see, even at that time, the word nigger really was a problem. Do I use it or not use it? That's the word they used. That's what they said. Why shouldn't I use the word that they used? But he had a lot of problems with it. And as a result of that, actually, when Huck Finn was finally published, the Concord Public Library banned not only Huck Finn, but all of Mark Twain's works, just because of how the Huck Finn story was written. And for many other people, the fact of a black man and a white man going in a boat on a trip downriver was more than they could encompass. Let's remember that this was an age of inventions, and he was a very wealthy man, but he had inherited his father's genes a little bit. He bought and sold stocks, always losing money. He invested in all sorts of inventions. The most famous one was the James Page typesetter. This guy, James Page, had designed an automatic typesetter that had many parts but could print an article very, very quickly. It kept breaking down, it kept having problems, it kept needing repairs, and Mark kept investing money in it and investing money, and nothing ever came of it. He also invested in steam generators, steam pulley, engraving process, games to improve memory. However, when Alexander Graham Bell came by to ask him to invest in his invention, he refused. So he wasn't that smart, the only one that would have helped. He refused it. I must say that on top of all these bad investments, he always paid tuition for 2 black students to go to Yale University. So that's something he always did every year. Pretty soon, money became a problem because of all his bad investments and everything else. Even though his books were selling well, he was well known and famous. And believe it or not, he finally had to decide to leave his Hartford house and go travel through Europe. Traveling through Europe, staying at first-class hotels and taking first-class transportation cost him less per month than staying in the Hartford house. It cost $30,000 a year to keep just for expenses of the house and the servants and everything else there. So they didn't want to, but they were finally forced into doing it. They closed up the house and went to Europe, England, Germany, spent quite a bit of time in Florence, and really enjoyed their trip, and he spent a great deal of time writing as well. He would sign in hotels, name Sam Clemens, profession Mark Twain. So that's, he liked the fact that he was known by almost everybody. He has a very unusual face, and everybody sort of knew him. The villa in Florence that they rented was so big that when he saw it, he turned to his family and said, okay, I want everybody to meet here by the front door every 3 hours so we can be sure that everybody's here. Because it was just too big a villa. He didn't want one that big. Then came the panic of 1893. 1893 was a bad year. The stock market, almost as bad as 1929. And all his creditors they want their money. So he had to come back to the United States and try and put things together. So in 1894, he came back to the United States, to New York. And it so happened, this was the fortunate thing, that he was staying at the Waldorf Astoria at the same time that Henry Rogers, the president and CEO of Standard Oil, was staying there. And of course everybody knew Mark Twain, and Rogers wanted to meet him and liked him and really took a fancy to him. So they went and had a few drinks afterwards, and Mark started telling him all about his problems. And Henry Rogers said, okay, you need to do a few things here. Give me a list of all your assets. Give me a list of all your debts. Okay, we're going to sell this, sell that, sell that. And we're going to take care of this. Now, this page typesetter, I'm going to give it to this newspaper in New York to try for 2 weeks. And this newspaper tried it and said, yeah, it's a wonderful machine, but it breaks down all the time. It will never work. We can't use it. We can't trust it. We don't want it. So Rogers told Twain, we're getting rid of it. And little by little, he got rid and sold or just eliminated all his debts and made him promise that he was not going to invest in anything else again. He didn't keep that promise, but really cut way down. Now, so this cuts his expenses, but then money has to come in. He owed $2 million at that time. That's a lot of money. And how do you collect it? And Rogers had an idea. He said, I'm going to arrange a round-the-world lecture series. You're going to spend 2 years going all over the world, giving lectures. The money you make comes to me. I will pay all your expenses, and when you get back, we'll see where we are. He sort of had no choice. And so he went off on this lecture tour. First stop was Cleveland, where he gave 2 talks. Then 22 other cities in the United States. Then went to Vancouver, Hawaii, Fiji, New Zealand, Australia, Ceylon, India, where he visited Gandhi. And the Taj Mahal looks like my Hartford house. I've seen his Hartford house, I haven't seen the Taj Mahal. I don't know. And then went to South Africa and spent some time there, and then to England, where the trip was over. They had paid off all their debts. Took 2 years to do all this traveling. For a man to have seen the whole world at the end of the 19th century was very unusual, but he did. Well, when he got to England, unfortunately there was a telegram that Susie had died. I guess she had developed meningitis and had died in the Hartford house where she had stayed all alone. He was very upset. This was probably the greatest tragedy of his life. And his one comment is, no more Christmas, no more holidays, no more New Year's. And they got an apartment in 14 West 10th Street in Manhattan. Could never get back to Hartford again. He started getting involved in, by now he was over 60, had been bankrupt, but now had rebuilt his money. And he started getting involved in politics and had very definite ideas about everything. He attacked especially King Leopold of Belgium for the way he was treating the Congo. He attacked the American missionaries in China who were wreaking havoc with the life of the Chinese, just like they had done in Hawaii. He attacked the United States for Cuba and the Philippines and the militarism of the country. He was against the British for the Boer War. One line that I think is worth reading: our present civil system, we require a plumber to know something about his business, at least which side of the pipe is on the inside. Yet we entrust the Treasury Department to a villager who cannot manage his 2-week wash bill. The diplomatic corps speaks only English, and I'm flattering them at that. The vast business of the custom house is in the hands of a flathead who cannot tell a bill of lading from the transit of Venus. People try to get him to calm down, don't talk so much. I will have my say. And he insisted on continuing to write about many of these things. The one good thing he did at this time, is Ulysses Grant had come back from his European victory trip to find out that his son had invested all their money with a friend who had absconded with it. So Ulysses Grant had no money, and in addition had cancer of the esophagus. And Mark Twain's line I thought was good: the country will always stand by you in every inexpensive way. But he realized Grant was going to be dead in a few months, but his wife was going to need to survive and have some money. So he persuaded Grant to write his memoirs. And it was a book that sold very well. And Mrs. Grant was really able to survive very comfortably on the results of that. At this point, Livy got sick, and it's hard to understand what it meant to him because they were so different, but he absolutely adored this woman. She was everything for him. And he could be rowdy and upset and all that, but when she was around, he would quiet down immediately and be fine. And unfortunately, doctors have a very bad habit of always wanting to do something instead of just standing there sometimes. The doctors didn't know what was wrong with Livy. And 3 consultants, I mean, he was a big wheel. He was a famous person, decided that Livy needed to travel. God only knows why travel would help any disease, but they felt that way. And they decided that it had to be Florence, because Florence in the spring has very little rain, no wind, and it was wonderful. But then to compound the stupidity of these doctors is unbelievable. They decided that he shouldn't see her because he would upset her. And so they went to Florence, they did it, and he would stand outside her door walking back and forth, just couldn't go in. He would stand outside their window and couldn't go in. Unbelievable stupidity, but what can you do? Then she died, unfortunately. We don't know what of, but I mean, she had been very sick, and probably it was TB. I mean, this is what many people had. And he was very, needless to say, very upset. There is no God and no universe, only empty space, and in it a lost and homeless and wandering thought. It is all a grotesque and brutal dream. And this is when he wrote Mark Twain's Bible and the Diaries of Adam and Eve. And the one line of their diaries that I always liked was Adam saying, "What do you mean I get kicked out of the Garden of Eden? Where Eve is the Garden of Eden, so I haven't been kicked out." This was the important thing to him. He described the Bible as full of interest, noble poetry in it, a few clever fables, blood-drenched history, a wealth of obscenity, and upwards of 1,000 lies. He had no faith in any religion, but when Livy had been alive and she wanted to go to church, he would go. And whenever she said something, he was always respectful of her thoughts, but he really did not believe in any of it. Well, after Florence, and after Livy's death, he returned to New York, where he got an apartment on Fifth Avenue. And here's a man who had never really gone to school. He was given a doctorate by Yale in 1907. And this was remarkable in that at the same time, Theodore Roosevelt was given a doctorate as well. And Mark Twain totally snubbed him, would have nothing to do with him, wouldn't even look at him, and walked out of the stage when Roosevelt was getting his degree. In addition, he was given a doctorate at Oxford. And he couldn't believe it. Dumb little Sammy getting a doctorate from Oxford. He was so proud of it. And his only comment was, if Livy could only have seen this. He would enjoy walking down Fifth Avenue in his Oxford degree clothes. And people would come and talk to him. Other times he would walk in a white suit. He liked having a white suit. He spoke in many places. The one thing that he liked about his, that is worth mentioning, he liked about his Oxford degree was when he arrived in England, the stevedores in the port cheered him. That to him meant more than anything else, that the stevedores know about me. The reading people is another thing, but everyone else knew him. And there's the story of this lady that saw him walking down Fifth Avenue and came up to just sort of see him and talk to him, like many did. And she said, "How God must love you," was her comment. So he turned to whoever he was walking and said, "I guess she hasn't heard." Whatever he meant. But then he was born under Halley's Comet in 1835, and he died in 1910 as Halley's Comet made again its appearance in the sky. And this was something he had mentioned before, that he wanted to live long enough to see Halley's Comet. I must say that, on a personal note, I always had wanted to live long enough to see Halley's Comet, but when Halley's Comet came, you couldn't see it. It was a non-event. It had been a wonderful spectacle in 1910 and in 1876, but it wasn't anything worth looking at in 1986. In summary, he was a great storyteller, and any one of his stories are just fun to read. Some I haven't mentioned. The Prince and the Pauper, for example, is one fabulous story. The idea had been given to him by Susie. And if one of you want to read one thing of his, this is a story you'd enjoy. They made a movie of him with Errol Flynn. The other one that, if any of you have not read Mark Twain, if you want to read one that you would enjoy, is Citizens Abroad, which is the story of his trip to the Holy Land, which is a very interesting and fun book to read. He was characterized by the fact that he mocked whatever others considered sacred. This was the big thing. Secondly, and it's unusual nowadays, sex never enters into any of his books or stories or pictures or descriptions. You don't need that to make something interesting, according to Mark Twain. He was a free thinker, an iconoclast, often blasphemous. It sort of brings, I don't know if I'm correct, but it brings to mind Monty Python to me, of his time. He's a little bit that way. And it can't be left unsaid. Twain probably went further than anyone else of that time in rejecting the hierarchy of color. The way he grew up, the way he lived, a black man was the same as a white man to him. And there weren't many that felt that way at his time. And as he describes, he's the bad little boy who did not come to grief, he said, in describing himself. Because he had done many bad things, but he just did not come to grief. He made literature that could be read by ordinary folks. And all his books are about America. He loved America and its language, and everything was written for America. And this is what he really wanted to be known as. It's just amazing that he had so little schooling and yet got so far. His father died shortly after he left, and he had never gotten along with his father. His father was a different person. His mother continued living in Hannibal, and he wrote letters to her. That paragraph I read to you about what he found in Carson City was a letter to his mother. I might mention in 1908, when he was 73 years old, all of a sudden, on a whim, he got on a train and went to Hannibal. And walked downtown, went to a hotel. "Can I have a room, please?" The clerk almost fainted, couldn't believe it, but gave him keys to the room. Within 15 minutes, the whole town was in the square right in front. He had told everybody about it.